Hello and welcome to the Discover History YouTube channel, and today you've got me, and as many of you will know, military history is my sort of specialist subject as such. Really, if I was going to go on Mastermind, it will probably have to be something along the lines of military history. I do predominantly specialise in the county regiment or soldiers from our county, which have included, for example, the 29th Regiment of Foot, which later became the Worcestershire Regiment, right up really until the 1970s when the Worcestershire Regiment merged with the Sherwood Foresters to form the Worcestershire and Sherwood Foresters, which strangely they're still around today as the Mercian Regiment. They're all part of the new amalgamation there. So military history is my specialist subject, and what I've decided to do today is bring you down some weaponry that I find absolutely fascinating. If you look at how weapon technology has changed through history, I find it fascinating on the raw materials that people have used to produce weapons out of. So if you think right back to the start of history, way back, way in the mists of time, people have always fought each other, fought over food, hunted with some form of weapon, and most of them were actually just made of wood. So we have things like wooden clubs. We've even got spears that we know of that were hardened in a fire. So you take a branch, you sharpen a point on it, and then you put it into the fire and you heat harden the actual wood. So it makes a very basic spear. But then eventually we start using flint, because obviously flint is an unbelievably sharp material. So you start seeing from wooden weapons over to flint weaponry. And the interesting thing with flint weapons is they can be reworked, and we do have evidence of tools and weapons being reworked. So should your flint spear get blunt from stabbing too many woolly mammoths, for example, for your meals, then you just re-nap them, so you resharpen them as such, really. But the problem with stone, just as it was with wood, is there's bound to be better materials, and over time people found new materials, and that leads us really onto a very small period in time which is often forgotten about, and that is often referred to as sort of the copper age, which is very short lived, and that's mainly because copper's not a bad metal, but it is quite soft. And then someone came up with this bright idea, well, why don't we make it into an alloy by mixing copper with another metal, and that other chosen metal was tin. So we then get copper and tin mixed together to create something known as bronze, and this is what fascinates me, these bronze weaponry. And what I've brought down is three examples of some weapons that are made out of bronze. So the first one I want to show you is this one here, and that is actually probably one of the earliest type of swords that we've got in history, really. You can't make swords out of flint. You can make knives out of flint, that's fine, but you can't produce anything as long as this out of stone, for example, out of a flint. So this is our first example of a proper sword, and this was made from by a good friend of mine that is a swordsmith as such, really, and he produces things out of bronze also. This is a bronze knife, a bronze sword, and the style of it has been around for quite some time. It starts life really in the Bronze Age, and it continues right into modern literature. If anyone here are fans of Lord of the Rings, for example, you will see the stereotypical leaf shape that this sword has. But the best thing about bronze is it is actually stronger than that short period in time which we often refer to as the Copper Age, and obviously this is much better than flint, for example. So we're improving all the time. There is a problem with using metal, and that is at times the edge can lose its blade, its sharpness, and this also has to be reworked. But it was much more difficult to rework a bronze blade than it was a flint, because flint is very simple, you re-nap it, whereas this takes a little bit more effort into the sharpening of it. But this is probably the first bronze weapon, the first weapon that I own anyway, that looks like a sword. Prior to that, like I said, we have flint instruments in wooden instruments really. So this is actually a fine tool for fighting these very early battles with in the Bronze Age. But I do have two other interesting weapons also made out of bronze. We have this one here, which isn't quite finished yet. It needs a wooden inlay. This is actually a copy of one of the knives, one of many knives in fact, that was found in Tutankhamun's tomb. Once again, it is made out of bronze, so this is made of a copper and tin. And it's cast from really an accurate copy in size and shape to the Tutankhamun knives in there. This one's quite blunt, whereas the original one would have been razor sharp, and like I said, would have had an inlay in it. We mainly do school history workshops for British history, so really anything from the Stone Age up to the 1950s. However, we do get asked for two periods that are not quite British history. There are links to British history. One of them is ancient Greece and one of them is ancient Egypt, and we use this a lot when we do workshops in ancient Egypt. We do a really interesting topic on Tutankhamun, for example, and this comes out several times in that workshop or festival that we run. So Tutankhamun's knife or dagger, really, we'd call it a dagger today, but these were being used as knives, almost like a sword at the time. Double-edged, by the way, just like the other sword. But then the final one, which is probably the most spectacular looking, is this bronze weapon here, which is usually referred to as a khopesh, and it very much looks like a sickle and would have been used in pretty much the same way. This one is also used in our ancient Egypt workshops and talks, mainly because this is also a copy from one found in Tutankhamun's tomb. It's very much a scythe used against people, really, which is a horrific way of putting it. We've now got a bronze blade, but it's now curved. And the famous thing we know about curved blades is they often say does actually do more damage than a straight blade. A straight blade is pretty much used to cut and chop, whereas a curved blade tends to slice and it does more damage to flesh, for example. And we know that from cavalry swords later in history, when they have these curved swords which are designed to cut and slice through people more than a straight edge sword. So this is our Egyptian khopesh, and like I said, also made out of bronze, but requires resharpening on a regular basis. And unlike flint, which is quite easy to resharpen, this takes a little bit more work. And the problem with bronze is it will get shorter and shorter. Over time, the more sharpening you carry out, the smaller this blade will get, until it's a waste of time and it should be melted down and cast again into a new blade. The interesting thing about all these weapons is the fact that they are cast. So you would take a stone mould usually, or even later on in history you would use the disappearing wax method, where you have a replica of it, you put it in sand and then you pour in the molten metal, and you create these sort of things. Whereas if you think of flint, they're being worked from a block of stone as such. But the Bronze Age, just like the very short period, the Copper Age and then the Stone Age prior to that, was also short-lived, because over time people wanted to advance more, wanted a metal that would keep its edge for longer. And that's why we go from the Stone Age into the very small period I keep saying, because it's very rarely mentioned, that period where we start using a little bit of metal, copper, and then we go into this Bronze Age. We then start using iron, and that's the age where you start seeing huge amounts of weaponry, lots of different shapes of weaponry. We go from having a wide selection of spears, for example. We have a wide selection of swords that are being used, and iron is something that you can put a better edge on, they say, and can be sharpened again and again. The best sword blades actually have an edge added to the actual metal blade as well, and that's famous when you start looking at some of the blades later in history. So hopefully this has only been a short video, but it's given you a little bit of a glimpse of some of the weapons that we have here at the Discover History headquarters. And if you are interested in military history, or in particular weaponry, please comment and we'll add some more videos on our YouTube channel. So there are bronze weapons, some of our bronze weapons, by the way. We do have other ones. Spears, for example, we would struggle getting them in the room. But hopefully that's given you a little glimpse on some of the weapons that we have and what we use on a regular basis, schools, talks and so on. If you're interested in booking us for schools, talks or anything like that, remember please go to our website www.discoverhistory.co.uk. Anyway, on that note, stay safe. I do believe Helen might appear tomorrow. Stay safe, stay indoors and have a good weekend. See you soon. Bye bye.